The arrogant white cop stopped the black mailman, not knowing he was the father of the city's police commissioner. It was just a routine mail delivery until Officer Brent Halder decided it wasn't. He drew his hand over his belt, thumb grazing the holster, and shouted across the street, "Hey, you don't look like you belong here." Thomas Grant didn't flinch. He was 62, had been delivering mail since 1986, and had heard versions of that same line more times than he could count. Still, it always hit differently when the one saying it had a badge, a gun, and a tone soaked in suspicion. He turned slowly, holding the stack of mail clearly in front of him like a peace offering. "I'm with the USPS," Thomas said. Calm, clear, professional. "Just delivering packages, sir." Brent crossed the street with the swagger of someone who had never been challenged. Mid-30s, pale skin, wraparound sunglasses even though it was overcast. His squad car idled at the curb, its lights off but presence loud. "I didn't ask what you were doing. I asked what you're doing here," Brent said, emphasizing the last word like the block of brownstones behind Thomas was sacred ground. Thomas tilted his head. "This is part of my route. Been my route for 9 years." Brent stopped a few feet away, close enough to inspect, to impose. "You got ID?" "Of course," Thomas said. He reached slowly into his USPS-issued blue satchel and handed over his laminated carrier card. Brent didn't take it. He didn't even look at it. Instead, he let his hand rest on his belt again. Not threatening yet, but definitely rehearsed. "You're acting real nervous for someone just delivering mail." Thomas blinked. "Sir, you stopped me." Brent's radio crackled. He ignored it. "Let me see your hands." "I'm holding letters," Thomas said quietly. "Drop them." Thomas knelt and placed the envelopes on the sidewalk like they were fragile glass. He straightened up slowly. His knees weren't what they used to be. "Put your hands on the truck." That's when something changed. Not in Thomas. He didn't move. But inside him, something familiar stirred. He told his daughter once that he'd gotten used to this sort of thing, that it didn't bother him anymore. That was a lie. What he'd gotten used to was surviving it. He looked Officer Brent Halder square in the face and said, "Son, do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Brent snorted. "Yeah, a suspect." Thomas's eyes darkened, not with fear, but with something Brent couldn't recognize: ancestral patience. "I'm the guy who watched you get sworn in on the news 2 years ago. I was standing in the back when they handed you your badge. And I'm also the guy who raised your boss." Brent blinked. "What?" "My daughter," Thomas said, and for the first time, there was steel in his voice. "Is Commissioner Dana Grant." Brent's hand twitched off his belt. His shoulders stiffened. "You're lying." "Try me," Thomas said. And right then, Brent's radio came alive again. "All units, be advised. Commissioner Grant en route to West Arlington. ETA 10 minutes. Thomas didn't even smile. Brent took a step back. The kind of step you take when you realize the gun you thought wasn't loaded is pointed at your foot. Thomas leaned against the truck, folded his arms. "I'd suggest you start thinking about what you're going to say when she gets here." I wasn't just about a stop. It was about a reckoning. 10 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up behind the patrol car, and out stepped Commissioner Dana Grant, press suit, combat boots, and that look on her face Thomas recognized from her teenage years. The look she wore when she was ready to burn the world down and rebuild it in justice. "Dad," she said, voice tight. He nodded. "I'm okay." Then she turned to Brent, who was now standing straighter than a flagpole. "Officer Halder, is there a reason you're detaining a federal employee on duty?" Brent opened his mouth, closed it. Sweat gathered at his temples. "Two didn't recognize him, Commissioner." She raised her eyebrow. "That's the defense? I thought he was acting suspicious." "Suspicious?" Her voice cracked like thunder. "He's wearing a uniform and holding mail. What exactly looked suspicious to you, officer?" Brent swallowed. "Two don't know." "That's right. You don't." She stepped closer. "Because you weren't looking for evidence. You were looking for confirmation of a bias you already had." Brent's jaw twitched. "I was just doing my job." Dana's face froze. "No. You were doing the opposite of your job. You were abusing your authority. And you did it to a man who has served this city longer than you've been alive." Thomas watched his daughter with pride and heartbreak. Pride for the woman she'd become. Heartbreak that she still had to fight the battles he thought her generation would never know. Dana turned to him. "Dad, do you want to press charges?" Thomas looked at Brent, who suddenly seemed small. Smaller than the uniform, smaller than the badge, smaller than the idea of power he'd worn like armor just 15 minutes earlier. "No," Thomas said, "but I want him to listen." Brent looked up. I want you to sit with me, Thomas said. Right here. On the curb. Brent hesitated. But Dana's gaze didn't waver. He sat. Thomas lowered himself next to him. You know, Thomas said, when I started this job, I used to walk 30 blocks a day. Rain, snow, whatever. I did it because I believed in what this country stood for, even when it didn't stand for me. Brent stared at the street. You see a black man in a neighborhood you don't expect and think crime, Thomas said. But you don't see me. You don't see the aching knees, the paper cuts, the 35 years of showing up on time. Brent nodded once. Quietly. Thomas sighed. You got a lot of years ahead of you. Don't waste them thinking a badge makes you bigger than people. It just makes you more responsible for what you do to them. Brent whispered, I'm sorry, sir. I know, Thomas said. He stood, dusted off his hands, and looked at his daughter. She gave him a small nod, one they'd been sharing since she was a kid too scared to raise her hand in class. Let's go home, Dad, she said. He climbed into the SUV beside her. Brent remained on the curb, and the city kept breathing. But not the same, because something had shifted, and it started with a stop. The next morning, Officer Brent Halder stood in front of his precinct locker, the door half open, his hand resting on the handle like it weighed 100 pounds. The locker room buzzed with quiet conversation, half glances, and the kind of tension that made even the fluorescent lights hum louder. His name was on everyone's lips, but no one said it to his face. His captain's voice from the day before still rang in his ears. Desk duty. Indefinitely. Commissioner's orders. He hadn't slept. Not because of the punishment been chewed out before, but because of the image of Thomas Grant, sitting beside him on the curb like a man who had nothing left to prove. That calm. That weight. That dignity. It had haunted Brent more than any reprimand. Across the city, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with his wife Denise, a mug of coffee in his hands. Morning sun filtered through the window, lighting up the stack of letters and neighborhood flyers he had brought home. Denise, a retired school principal, peered over her reading glasses. So, she said, you're a local hero now. Thomas chuckled. Is that what people are saying? The church ladies have already planned a segment about you for this Sunday. Don't act surprised. You married into a grapevine. He sipped his coffee. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, she said gently. But maybe it was time. He looked out the window, where a boy on a scooter zipped down the street. Dana called again last night. Said the mayor wanted to meet. I told her I wasn't interested. Denise tilted her head. Why not? I've worn this uniform for 35 years. My pride's not in making noise. It's in being reliable. Predictable. She thinks your quiet is too polite. Thomas shrugged. Maybe it is. But even as he said it, something stirred again. A ripple that hadn't settled since Brent's accusation. It wasn't just about him anymore. The world had seen what happened, and they were watching what he'd do next. 2 days later, he found himself standing in front of the same precinct where it had all happened. Dana walked beside him, in civilian clothes this time, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. I just want you to hear him out, she said. Thomas gave her a look. He's not my responsibility. No, Dana said, but he's still part of the city you love. Inside the building, Brent waited in the conference room, not in uniform. His sleeves were rolled up, and his posture wasn't military. It was human. He stood when Thomas walked in. Mr. Grant. Sir. Thomas nodded once. Dana stayed by the door but didn't speak. Brent cleared his throat. I read everything I could. About postal workers. About policing biases. About your service record. I didn't know, I didn't care to know what it means to walk your route every day, to be trusted by hundreds of people, to show up for them when no one else does. Thomas studied him. Did reading change your gut? Brent swallowed. Not yet. But it made me ask better questions. Thomas Saturday, like what? Brent hesitated. Then, why did I feel the need to be in control that day? Why did your presence feel like a challenge instead of just a man doing his job? Thomas didn't answer right away. Because you were taught fear. Then handed authority. Dangerous combination. Brent looked down. I've requested to be transferred to community policing. I want to serve in neighborhoods I'm not from. I want to learn. Thomas narrowed his eyes. You want redemption? No, Brent said. I want to be useful. There was silence. Then Thomas stood and reached into his jacket pocket. He placed a letter on the table. Start here, he said. Brent looked down. It was a flyer for a mentoring program Thomas had been part of years ago, connecting officers and local teens in dialogue. Come Saturday. No uniforms. Just conversation. Brent nodded, eyes glassy. Yes, sir. That night, the story broke again, this time not with outrage, but with humility. Photos surfaced of the two men, sitting at the community center, surrounded by teenagers of every shade, listening, learning. Meanwhile, Dana was in her own war at City Hall. Several high-profile officials, stung by the publicity, had quietly suggested she step back from the controversy. You're too close to this, one councilman told her. This is about perception, conflict of interest. Dana leaned in across the table. You think I'm going to apologize for having a father who lived this city's contradictions for 30 years? That's not a conflict. That's credibility. She stood. You want perception? Here's only an unarmed black man gets stopped on a public street while delivering mail. Then your officers ask why he's there. That's not perception. That's reality. By the end of the week, Dana had launched a department-wide review of street-level engagement practices. She was met with resistance. Naturally. But she also received dozens of anonymous letters from officers, cadets, citizens thanking her for pushing. At the Saturday event, Thomas stood before a circle of kids, mostly black and Latino, their arms crossed at first, guarded. Brent sat quietly off to the side, just listening. Thomas spoke low, steady. I used to think if I kept my head down, did my job, followed the rules, I could avoid trouble. But sometimes the rules were made without me in mind. Sometimes silence ain't peace. It's just delayed pain. A teen with braids asked, but what's the point, though? You speak up, and they still don't care. Thomas nodded. True. Not everyone will listen. But someone always is. And if you can reach even one, you've changed a future. By the end, the kids were asking questions. Real ones. Brent even answered a few. The wall wasn't gone, but it had cracks. Later, as the crowd thinned, Brent approached Thomas and offered a handshake. Thomas took it. Brent said, I won't forget this. You better not, Thomas replied. Because if you ever stop trying, you're not just failing me. You're failing every kid in that room. They stood in silence for a beat, the kind that carries weight beyond words. And then Brent walked away, back into a system he now saw with clearer eyes. At home that evening, Dana and Thomas sat together on the porch. You did good, she said. I didn't do anything big, he replied. She smiled. You showed up. That's the biggest thing of all. He looked at her. You think he meant it? That he'll change. I think he's trying, she said. And that's more than most. Thomas took a deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs and your memory all at once. He looked up at the stars. You know, he said, I used to think my job was just about letters, delivering them on time, every day. No drama. But maybe I was delivering something else too. Dana tilted her head. Like what? Presence. Stability. A reminder that someone cares enough to walk your block, even when no one sees. She rested her head on his shoulder. I saw. He smiled. Across the city, someone else was noticing too. But that would be the next chapter. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and humid air, but something in the city felt a little lighter. Thomas was back on his route, uniform crisp, posture proud, mailbag swinging rhythmically at his side like a soldier's pack. Neighbors waved from porches. Kids ran up for fist bumps. Even the grumpiest dog on the block only barked once before retreating behind a screen door. But it wasn't just the usual appreciation. This time, they'd seen what he carried that went beyond paper envelopes and utility bills. They had watched him endure humiliation without exploding. They'd seen him teach without lecturing. And now, people weren't just waving, they were thanking. That same morning, Officer Brent Halder sat through the first of what would be many required anti-bias workshops. Some of the other officers slouched, rolled their eyes, took it like a chore. Brent didn't. He took notes. He listened. And when they broke into small groups, he didn't avoid the hard questions. He leaned into them. It wasn't guilt driving him. It was recognition. It was understanding that being part of a system wasn't just about doing your job, it was about being responsible for the impact your presence had on others. For once, he didn't feel defensive. He felt accountable. Across town, Dana Grant sat in a conference room at City Hall. She faced a wall of department heads, each with their own political instincts. Some wary of change, others weary of scandal, but all of them waiting to see how far she was willing to go. We can't solve centuries of injustice in one budget cycle, said the deputy mayor. We need gradual reforms. Dana locked eyes with him. Gradual doesn't save lives. It delays accountability. And right now, the city is watching how we handle our own. A few chairs shifted uncomfortably. She continued, "We're not just talking about trust. We're talking about repair. We're talking about dignity. And if we can't give a mail carrier doing his job the benefit of the doubt, then what chance does anyone else have?" She paused, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Then she placed a proposal on the table. New training protocols, civilian-led oversight panels, a citywide listening initiative with community liaisons embedded directly into precincts. One of the senior advisors raised an eyebrow. "All this because your father was stopped?" "No," Dana said calmly. "All this because too many fathers have been stopped, and most of them didn't have daughters in my position to fight for them." The proposal passed unanimously. That weekend, the first community listening session took place at a church in East End. Thomas was invited to speak not as the commissioner's father, but as a citizen. He stood before the packed fellowship hall. Folding chairs stretched from pulpit to front door. Police officers in plain clothes sat beside grandmothers, teenagers, and small business owners. Dana sat quietly in the back, notebook in hand. Thomas cleared his throat. "I'm not here because I'm special," he began. "I'm here because I survived a moment that too many of us don't. Not because I was smarter or calmer, but because I was lucky." The room was silent. "I've walked these streets for decades. Not once did I carry a weapon. But every day, I carried something heavier. I carried the burden of being seen as a threat first and a man second." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the audience. "When that officer stopped me, I wasn't afraid of jail. I was afraid of becoming a headline, of my daughter getting a call that didn't end in conversation but in mourning." Murmurs spread. He looked down, then back up. But something happened that day. Not just to me. To him. To all of us. Because sometimes change doesn't come from yelling. Sometimes it comes from sitting down beside someone who has no reason to trust you and choosing to see each other. He let that settle. And that's why I'm still walking. Still delivering. Not just mail, but presence. Because people don't just need information, they need to know someone is showing up. Every day. The room rose in a standing ovation. Dana wiped away a tear. Even Brent, sitting in the last row, clapped slowly, a lump in his throat. After the event, as people mingled in the church courtyard, a teenage boy approached Thomas. "Mr. Grant," the boy asked, "how'd you stay so calm that day?" Thomas smiled, warm but tired. "I didn't," he said. "I just remembered that I've been black longer than he's been a cop, and I wasn't about to let him teach me something I already knew." The boy laughed, then nodded. "Can I walk with you sometime? You know, on your route." Thomas looked at him, surprised. "You want to deliver mail?" "I want to see how you carry it," the boy said, meaning more than just paper. Thomas chuckled. "All right, then. But bring good shoes. It's a long walk." That Monday, they walked together. The boy asked questions. Thomas told stories. Neighbors waved, curious and delighted. The city, in its small way, was shifting. A week later, Thomas received a letter in the mail, not one he delivered, but one addressed to him. It was from Brent. Inside was a note, handwritten. "Mr. Grant, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that you gave me a gift I didn't deserve. You showed me who I was and who I could be. I'm going to earn the trust one once abused. Not because of pressure, but because of example. Yours. Thank you. Brent." Thomas folded the letter gently and placed it in a box in his hallway closet. Inside were decades of keepsakes, retirement party invites, Christmas cards from neighbors, drawings from kids he'd watched grow up. He added Brent's letter to the pile. One more piece of the journey. That night, Thomas and Denise sat on the porch again, just like they always did. Dana joined them, still in her uniform, shoes dusty from another long day. "Things are changing," she said. Thomas looked out over the street. "They always were. Just slow. But this feels different," she added. Denise smiled. "That's because you made it different." Thomas shook his head. "No, we did. All of us." Across the street, the neighbor's porch light flicked on. A toddler in a onesie pointed at Thomas and shouted, "Mailman." Everyone laughed. And for a moment, the weight lifted. Thomas leaned back, hands folded across his chest, heart full. The world hadn't been fixed, but it had been moved. An inch at a time. By footsteps. By letters. By the simple courage to stand still while someone else catches up. And by the quiet, powerful act of showing up. Every single day.